Hello. Thank you for coming. I'm Riyad Bengela, lead engineer at Automatic. I've been on the Gutenberg project from the start and guiding everyone around it. If you want to learn more about me, Riyad.blog, and there's the socials and everything. So today we're going to talk about structured content. What do we mean when we say structured content? It's structured content is about objects that are organized and formatted in a way that makes it reusable, adaptable, and machine readable. So you can use them in a lot of situations, like to render lists, to render forms, in headless use cases, without actually having to implement everything ad hoc. And so in WordPress, they are everywhere. The most important ones are post type. So a post is a structured content. It has a list of properties, a list of fields. Taxonomy as well is a post, like a category or a tag. And we can also think about third-party use cases like an event, like a book post type and things like that. All of these are structured content. And so before talking about the future of this in WordPress, like how do we deal with this kind of information in WordPress, let's go back a little bit to the past and see how WordPress evolved in relation to custom post types. So the initial release of WordPress happened in 2003. And at that time, WordPress was mostly a blogging tool. So it's just dealing with posts. But the ease of use of WordPress led a lot of people to try to use it in use cases that it was not really meant for. And so the need for APIs and tools to deal with these advanced use cases arise. And so the initial release that introduced metadata, like custom fields for posts, and which can be seen as the seeds for this kind of structured content usage in WordPress, was WordPress 2.0, released in 2005. But the biggest leap that WordPress did was actually in WordPress 3.0 in 2010, with the release of introduction of custom post types and custom taxonomies. And I think from that point, we could say WordPress became a fully capable CMS, and the usage of WordPress kind of started increasing more and more. And actually, but at that time when custom post type were released, there was no UI in the dashboard to be able to manipulate these objects and these structured content directly in WP Admin. But before even the release, plugin authors saw an opportunity there. And so there was a plugin that was released before actually 3.0 made it to the stable release. Even during the alpha and beta phase, it is called UI for post types, and it was the first plugin that introduced this kind of UI. And after that, obviously, there were a lot of plugins, including ACF, Metabox, and Pods, and others. And so the plugin, the need for that was very clear in the community. And so in parallel in that, WordPress actually introduced a lot of other small APIs that deal with structured content, but they were not actually meant for it entirely in the beginning. So, for example, in WordPress 2.7, WordPress introduced the Settings API. It's an API where the idea was to unify how third-party plugins and core register settings and render the forms in the WordPress settings page. And in parallel as well, in WordPress 3.1, a new class was introduced in WordPress called WP List Table, and it was about unifying how the different lists in WordPress are rendered, like the post list, the taxonomies list, or media list. It was about columns, right? And if you think about it, columns, what are columns? They are actually fields or properties. In the same way, a form is a list of fields, a table is also a list of fields. So all these independent initiatives, people starting to wonder in the community, what if there is a concept that unify all of these together? So core didn't evolve that much since then in this aspect. We introduced blocks to structure the HTML content, but we left these properties and fields to third parties. But there were some initiatives that were started by the community, most importantly the Fields API initiatives and the core fields team that exists in core. The idea was to try to unify how we build a unified specification about how we define these fields and how do we use them, how do we render things with them. But come 2023, 2024, we are in early days of the phase 3 phase of Gutenberg. And at that point, there is the admin redesign project that is launched in WordPress core. And so we have all these screens that we need to implement. Like, as you can see here, we have to redesign and re-implement all the lists in WordPress. Either it is for core lists, like for pages and things like that, but also support third-party lists. The other thing we had to implement is forms. Like in the sidebar here, you can see a quick edit form. So all these mockups were being designed by core designers, and we had to think about how to implement all these UIs everywhere, like either for patterns, templates, or how to redesign the media library and things like that. So to implement this, we didn't want to go and write all these screens one by one and recreate all these ad hoc APIs. For example, the settings screen here is also, this is a mockup that is not developed, but it is a goal for us to redesign the settings screen as well. So how do we go about that? How do we implement all these screens while at the same time having this long-term goal of arriving to something about this new concept, like introducing this fields API, and we, as I said, we don't want to recreate this screen one by one. So the approach we took is let's do a bottom-up approach. What do I mean by that? I mean, let's start with the ideal user experience that we want to achieve. Instead of defining a specification and trying to derive the UI from it, in general, if we go that way, we end up in a situation where the UI is not perfect and maybe it doesn't adapt to all the use cases. So we took a reverse approach. Let's start from the UI itself, build the UI that we want and try to discover what are these shapes, these concepts, these abstraction that unify all these UIs together. If you have been yesterday here in Matthias' talk, he was talking about the shapes of WordPress, how blocks and post types become the shape of WordPress. Maybe here there is a new shape to be discovered. Maybe there's a field shape that we have to discover from this UI to be able to unify them. And so that was the plan. And the initial UI we wanted to build is the list. So the data views component is about rendering lists, like shown in this mockup. It's the initial one is a table. So how do we render this table based on some API that is about defining the structure of our object? So I'm going to show some code, but I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible just to explain the concept. So for this talk, we're going to use posts as an example. So here I have a list of posts. I have one post. And for each post, what do we have? We have an ID, a title, a status, and an ID for a featured image. So the first thing we need to do is let's define the schema for this post. What are the properties? What are the fields of this post? And then try to think about how to render the UI based on it. So this is what we call the schema, or the list of fields. It's actually very simple. You can say we have 3 fields here: title, author, and status. For each one, we have an ID in the label. What the ID is basically how to extract the data from the object. So here, for example, if you have an object, you do title, and you get the title. The label is just a human-readable label that can be used, for example, to render the columns in a table, and can be used in other places, like each row can be labeled like an area label for screen readers and things like that. So this information is going to be used by the framework to render this automatically. So by default, this allows us to render like just extract automatically all the data and just render it as it is, like a string. But what if someone, like as I said, we want to start from the user experience. So what if we want to render something more advanced, like an icon or like an image or like something interactive in the table? How do we go about that? So similar to like how blocks have like edit function and save function to explain how they render in the editor or in the front end, a field can have an optional render function. It's basically just a function that takes the object, the current object we're working on, so the current post, and just render any React component. I'm not going to go into details. This is just a random example of a React component called status icon that maybe can take the string of the post status and render it as an icon. It's just to show that each field can define a custom render component for advanced use cases, but by default, it's optional. It's not, it's just going to render whatever the object contains. So we have now our list of fields, our schema, or sometimes it's called a JSON schema. And what's remaining is to describe what we want to render. So to roll back a little bit, we want to render a table, right? And we want, so for the table, there is a main column, which is what we call a title field. So we just say, OK, I have a view object. This is the description of the layout. I give it a type. I want to render a table. The main field of the table, so the first one, is the field called title. This corresponds to the ID I had before here. And the remaining columns I want to render is the fields, like author and status. Why do we need this? Like you can imagine, like a post object has maybe 20 or 30 fields, and you don't want to render all of them in your table. So when you say fields, it just pick the fields that you want to render, you order them as you wish. And the last step, so we have our two objects, we have our schema, the fields, we have our view object that describes what we want to render. We just use the component called DataViews. That component is, by the way, already available in WordPress/DataViews npm package, so you could use it in your plugins if needed. And you get something like this automatically, so the title and the rest of the columns. But we didn't want to stop here, so we are rendering lists. There are very different ways to render lists. We can render a table, but we can also render lists as grids or as timeline or other use cases. So how do we go from this? Let's talk about the grid now. Like for the templates, we wanted to see previews and like some description of the template. Like the table, it might not always be the right way to render a list of data. So how do we go from this to a grid while keeping our abstraction? And so for a grid, you need a preview of something. And so a featured image is a good example to use for posts. Like how do we render the featured image as a preview? So we define a new field called featured image field. It's just same API as any other field. It has a custom render function to render an image tag. And that's it. And we update our view object. We don't want a table anymore. We want a grid. And we define the media field that we want to use as a preview. And by doing these changes, we obtain something like this. And then the user would be able to switch as needed from table to lists, to tables to grids, etc. So let's do a quick recap. This is the data views. It allows you to render lists of data in all kinds of ways. It supports by default 3 layouts that are already available: table, grid, and list. What we call by list here is something close to email list, so where you have a list on the sidebar, you click on it, and you have a preview on the right. It was introduced in WordPress 6.5, and it supports like filtering, searching, paginations, all of that by default, reordering fields, support toggling visibility of fields on an like hide and show fields, and it also supports actions and bulk actions. What are actions? Actions are functions you can call per row. For example, in a table you want to delete a post, you define a delete post action, and so you have the same action available for all posts. It can also support bulk actions, so when you select multiple items, the same action can be triggered. I don't want to go into too much detail, but just want to do a quick recap. So the next step, so now we have a way to render lists based on a schema, on a fields list, or on a fields API, if you like. The next step is, how can we use this exact same information, this exact same schema to render forms? And we don't want, again, to recreate all these forms. As you can see here on the sidebar, this is a panel that we want to render for a site editor when you select a page, or like you want to quick edit it on the sidebar. It's also the same thing that exists in the editor, in like block editor. If you go in the block editor, there's a document inspector sidebar, like for posts or pages. It's where we render like template post status. It's actually the same thing conceptually. Like, how do we render these automatically without having to write the components manually? So the other way, the other thing is that this is a form as well. Like on the sidebar here, you can see it's the same form, but rendered as inline controlled instead of a panel in this here. Like here, each item you have to click, show a drop down, and manipulate the control in a popover. But here, the controls are rendered inline. These are conceptually the same thing. So how do we arrive to this? How do we render this automatically? So we use the same list of fields that we use for data views, and we just add some small information to each field. We augment it with a type. Like by default, like if you add a type text, for example, to a field, you're gonna get an input to edit this field, like a text input. So for example, the title, user would be able to, if it's rendered in a form, would be able to modify that automatically. And so there are other types that we support by default right now. These are the ones like, we have the text input, we support numbers, and we support date time. But if you want to have a very specific control to be able to edit a given field, like you don't want to use the built-in ones, the same way we have render to have an advanced rendering technique, we have an edit function to define the control to edit a given field, like to implement advanced use cases. In the featured image example, like maybe we want a drop zone where people can drag and drop images, or you want a button that you click it, it opens the media library to upload an image. We don't have that support by default, but you could implement it by defining a custom edit function. It's basically a React component that when the user makes a change, you have just to call the onChange callback with the new value that needs to be stored. So you arrive to something like this, for the featured image. And then similarly to lists, we have to tell our form, what do we want to render? What is the layout of this form? And for forms, it's basically picking the fields that we want to see in the form. In this case, I'm going to pick title, status, and featured image. I pass my form object in addition to the fields definition that I had to the data form component, and I get something like this, like a form ready to be used to edit that post object. But as I said, this is not the only layout that we support for forms. Like we support something else that's called a panel. And so you can also decide, okay, let's render this form as a panel. And but for the featured image, I want to keep it as an inline control. So do we have the possibility to also define a layout for each field, like regular, which means it's inline. So you get something like this. For the featured image, it's editable inline, but for the other fields, you have to click to actually get the control in a drop-down. So another recap for the data form component is also something that is already available in WordPress 6.6. You can use it in your own plugins from the same NPM package. It supports regular and panel rendering. It supports several field types. It supports also additional controls like a select from a list of items or a radio control. And it supports bulk editing. If you pass single item or multiple items, the form is rendered and you'll be able to edit all these objects at the same time. What about extensibility, you may ask? Like one of our primary goals as well when implementing these APIs was like, let's keep extensibility in our mind. And we want all of the things to be extensible by third parties. And like this is why the API is declarative. It's like a list of objects that if you modify a small thing in it, the whole rendering changes. So what can you do today in terms of extensibility with DataViews and DataForm is adding a field, for example. Like how do we add a field in general in WordPress? You may already be familiar. This is not a new API. You can register a custom field for a post. And the only, like here, I'm registering a page color field. I'm showing it in REST. That way it's accessible in the front end to be able to be added to the data views. And what we added is this experimental API. This is only available if you use the Gutenberg plugin right now, because there's maybe some changes that we want to make to it. So use it carefully. If you do that, you register a new field. Like it's the same format that I used initially to define the other built-in fields like title, status, etc. And I'm adding a color field to the page post type. So when I go to the data views for pages and like the quick edit form for pages, I will have the color field available there. In the same way, I can unregister a built-in field, the field that is defined by core itself. Like in this example, I can remove the author field. Maybe I don't want to show it in the table or something. Similar API exists for actions. As I said earlier, action is about making something on top of for a selection. Like you select a post, you can apply an action on the post. How do you define an action? You just give it a name. You say whether it's primary or not. If it's primary, it's rendered inline, like in the table. If it's secondary, it's rendered in a more menu, like you have a 3 dots menu where you click and you actually see the action. An action can support bulk editing or not. So if you have a single selection, it shows up. If you have multiple, depending on whether the action supports bulk editing, it can show up or not. And you define the callback of the action. And so whatever you write there is going to be executed when the action is triggered for the current selection. Like for this example, I'm just rendering an alert dialog. The same way you can unregister actions, and this is very useful. For example, like I know there's a lot of plugins that offer the duplicate post action. So maybe you could say, I want to remove the default duplicate post action and replace it with my own. So you could do that and just remove any built-in action that is defined by core. So summary of the extensibility today is that you have two low-level components that you can use in your own plugins to build your own lists and forms, data views and data form. We have some low-level APIs also to be able to register fields, remove fields, register actions, remove action. But this is not the end goal. The end goal is actually a higher level abstraction that is super easy to use. We want 90% of the use cases to be able to be addressed by a simple PHP API, and 10% for advanced use cases, you might need to write some JavaScript and some React. So what does this mean? It means like the fields and it needs to be a serializable format. So the same format is shared between the backend and the server. So the goal is to arrive to something like this. Like this function doesn't exist today. It's just like a goal. Like maybe the future is this. So you would register a field for a post type or for a taxonomy or for whatever structured object you want to register a field for. And you would say, I want to add like a post color field, its type of string, and that's it. Like when you do that, the idea is This automatically registers the custom fields meta. Like today, it's also registered the field in the data views in the front end. It's also registered it for the form, so user would be able to edit it. And maybe even further, maybe you just do this and you also get block variations for this that you can use in your posts and templates. And for example, I want to render the active color for the current post. I just insert these block variations, and using the block bindings API, the value of this variation is actually bound to what is edited by the user. So that's one of the goals. The other goal is, like I said, DataViews support table, lists, and grids today. But what if a third-party developer wants to add like a timeline, like render the list of data as a timeline, or as a calendar, or like as a Kanban view? Like whatever you can think of, like the way you adjust or render a list of data together, you should be able to do it by defining a component that receives a configuration, like definition of the layout and the list of fields. The other thing is we want to split the data views component into smaller components. That way you can render it however you want. Right now when you render it, you get the filters on the top, you get pagination on the bottom, you get the data view itself in the middle. So maybe you want to tweak that a little bit. So one of our goals is also to split that monolith. And we want to allow registration of default views. If you go today to the site editor, like for pages or for templates, you have some default views there, like all posts, all pages, draft pages, trashed pages. Like we could imagine that third-party developers would register their own views there, like to build their own workflows for their own custom post types. So yeah, but regardless, there are actually already a lot of opportunities today to actually use these APIs. And like some examples I can think of are connected lists and forms. Like there is actually a library called DataKit that exists today. It's a third-party library. It's a wrapper around DataViews to be able to render these tables and these forms in the front end and connect them, for example, to post types. And all of that in PHP without even writing a single line of code in JavaScript. So you could also imagine form plugins. Like form plugins could actually use DataForm to generate their forms instead of having to build their own frameworks and things like that. Also, I was discussing yesterday with my friend Hector, and there's also a lot of opportunities to enhance data views. For example, what if there's a plugin that allows you to define formulas, like fields, where you compute the value based on other fields, or add conditional, render a color or not, depending on the value. So you could imagine like kind of like Excel in WordPress, or like Notion in WordPress. So all of this is actually something you can try to explore already using the DataViews API. Well, now that we have also these APIs in core, like we have ability to add fields, to render forms and lists, it's actually a small leap to think about the possibility of having a UI to edit this in core directly. Here I'm just showing some templates that were explored by our core designers, like to be able to say, okay, I want to add a custom field directly in core in the dashboard without using a plugin. So I think the step to go there is now as small as it can be. So I'm not making any promises or anything, but I'm saying that in the future, this might be a possibility, like core having some kinds of custom fields definition UI, like shown here as well. Like you could add a new field, for example, to the data views. So yeah, that's about it. If you want to learn more about both of these APIs, you can go to the storybook and play with them. There are stories. Stories are like a way to play with the UI components provided by WordPress without actually using WordPress or anything. So you can go there, search for DataViews and DataForms, and see how they feel, how they work. We have some tutorials on the developer blog about DataViews, how to use them in your own custom admin page, etc. There is an official documentation on the block editor handbook, like the DataViews package. And if you want to follow progress, there's several issues. These are the most important ones. One about DataViews, DataForm, and extensibility. And yeah, that's about it. If you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Riyad. Now